Pokemon, a series loved by adults and children alike. A series that has brought people together, both virtually and physically. A series that has lived through generations of not only people, but consoles as well. I'm going to split this video into two parts overall. Pre-Gen 5 and post-Gen 5. You will eventually come to see why later. The series of video games started with the first generation of Pokemon, 151 Pokemon to battle and collect. The first game was released on the 27th of February 1996 for the Game Boy Color under the names of Pokemon Red and Pokemon Green. The US releases were 2.5 years later on the 28th of September 1998, with a third game under the name of Pokemon Yellow being released on the 12th of September 1998 in Japan and the 18th of October 1999 in the US. And the only change being that the only starter Pokemon is Pikachu. The first generation of Pokemon was revolutionary for the gaming industry. While people had watched the anime and got a general understanding of how the universe functioned, the game was still incredibly new. Nothing of the sort had ever been produced ever, and especially not for a handheld console. The game got people talking all over the world, taking it completely by storm and setting the stage for years to come. The game is basic with little to no story other than to take down the bad guys. The whole point of the game is, for those of you that don't know, is for you, the player, to choose a starter Pokemon and start an adventure ending in you taking down the bad guys, a hero, and capturing the legendary Pokemon. The game is less about the destination and more about the journey, if you will, making you battle Pokemon with other trainers you find among the world to level up and progress. The formula is simple. Get Pokemon, battle Pokemon, level Pokemon, become champion. It's so simple yet so effective. So why did the series fall off in the later generations? Because of the technical limitations of the Game Boy Color, the game didn't look so good at all, compared to today's standards anyway. The game was mostly white with a few pixely sprites in the screen at one time with 8-bit music. The occasional other color was present, but mostly coated in some form of white, making the game look very drab and feel very lifeless overall. While this game no longer holds up when compared to some of the later titles, it is still incredibly good considering the game allowed the birth of some of the later generations to come down the line. This game is still regularly talked about in a lot of ways, and has had a few conspiracies and theories thrown around back in the day. One such conspiracy was that of the Lavender Town Syndrome. I'll briefly explain it for the uninitiated, but I highly recommend having a read on some of the wiki entries and stories for yourself. This so-called syndrome would take place once the player reaches Lavender Town and the music starts. It is said that in some beta versions of the game that were handed out to the Japanese youth shortly before release, the frequencies displayed from the music would combine to make a binaural beat. This basically means that one frequency would enter one ear and another frequency in the other, combining to make a different sound within the brain. This can trigger certain emotions and feelings of distress. A good example would be from Hellblade's Senua's Sacrifice. The game utilizes binaural beats to induce a state of psychosis to help you relate to the main character. The binaural beats in the Lavender Town theme were said to give children within the ages of 7 to 12 suicidal tendencies, and even in some cases achieving suicide. It is a dark read but an entertaining one at that. I'll leave a link in the description below of a good entry on this phenomenon. The game starts you off in the Kanto Region, which for those of you who don't know is based off of a region in Japan of the same name. You choose a starter Pokemon from the three, which are Squirtle, the water-type Pokemon, Charmander, the fire-type Pokemon, and Bulbasaur, the grass-type Pokemon. And then start your journey across the region, finding and catching Pokemon to add to your party before taking on Team Rocket and the Elite Four, before becoming champion of said region. As stated before, the formula is simple but effective. Each time you win a Pokemon battle, you are rewarded with XP and money if it were a trainer battle, which just keeps you coming back for more. It's addicting, some would say. Team Rocket is the main villainous corporation in this game, with their main goal being obtaining rare and powerful Pokemon to help their criminal syndicate in hopes of someday taking over the world. It's quite a simple goal, but it's enough to make the player want to beat them there, and there is a real sense of achievement if you do. There is a story, albeit loosely focused on, as the core focus for the game seems to be that of gameplay. Generation 2 was the same as Generation 1 for the most part, with the core gameplay being almost the same. The Generation 2 games were named Silver and Gold, really setting in stone the opposites theme they had in the previous generations and in all generations afterwards. A third game was released into this generation named Pokemon Crystal. Like the other third games of the series, if you will, this had some slight but subtle changes, nothing that really affected core gameplay as much but gave it an edge over its predecessors. The Crystal variant was the first mainline Pokemon game to include online capabilities of battle and trading and other such things, as being the first game to include the female option to play as. Generation 2 was still very well received as the game added 100 new Pokemon, bringing the total up to 251, giving players even more to do in the massive open world of Pokemon, with a new Pokemon also brought a brand new region. The Johto Region, based off of another area of Japan, specifically the Kansai, Tokai and Eastern Shikoku areas of the country. While this game does have its lore, it's not really present in the game, meaning you will have most likely resorted to the anime to find out what that lore is. The game itself takes place 3 years after Gen 1 and Gen 3 and is said to be happening at the same time as Gen 4. Team Rocket seemed to be gone completely, as the player from Gen 1 had taken them down, until some of their loyal followers and workers tried rebuilding in the Sevi Islands, bringing back Team Rocket. The player obviously finds out about this and battles every Team Rocket member they can before the same outcome happens again. You take them down and foil their plans once and for all, and that's the end of Gen 2. Or is it? Gen 2 was the first in the mainline series games to include different legendaries to be present in each of the different games. Silver had the psychic flying type Lugia, while on the other end of the scale, Gold had the fire flying type Ho-Oh. This gave players more reason to trade Pokemon they didn't have, as the different games yielded slightly different results. Pokemon as a video game series was lucking up. That's when Generation 3 arrived. Generation 3 revolutionised the series once more, as it not only had 3 new games but another 2 remakes of Gen 1 games. These games were released in the early 2000s on Nintendo's brand new handheld console, the Game Boy Advance, and boy, was it advanced. The new console allowed for full 60 FPS displays as well as stunning colour. This meant the world of good for the Pokemon series, as the new technological advancements in handheld gaming meant that Pokemon had a new way to be played, and it breathed a massive breath of fresh air back into the series itself. The game had stunning new visuals, allowing more than just white backgrounds. They had backgrounds that matched the environment you were currently in, which at the time was amazing. The new installments of games which were released on the GBA were Pokemon Ruby, Pokemon Sapphire, and Pokemon Emerald. The game adds more depth and life to it by adding personality to the Pokemon, so not only is it moves and types you'll have to worry about, but personality as well. The total combination of personalities goes to some absurd number around the 4 billion mark. The games were pretty much all the same in a sense, but added a cool new feature which yet again made buying one or the other an even more difficult choice. Ruby and Sapphire had different villain companies unique to which game you bought. Ruby had Team Magma, whose goal it was to expand landmass of the Earth by using the legendary Pokemon Groudon. Sapphire had Team Aqua, whose goal was to expand the ocean by using the legendary Pokemon Groudon. And the team which isn't in the forefront helps the player take down the opposing team in the game. This was also the first mainline Pokemon game to add the double battle system, which allowed 2 Pokemon on each side, leading to some more interesting battles overall. The game also boasts the addition of 135 new Pokemon, making the total 386. The game sets you in the Hoenn Region, which, you guessed it, is based off of another location in Japan, specifically the main island of Kyushu. The game is largely the same, with the same objective of taking down bad guys and becoming the champion. Only this time, because of its higher technical limitation, there is way more content in the game, giving players a sense of purpose in the world, as there is more to do and take care of. Because the game was incompatible with Gen 1 and Gen 2, Gen 3 enhanced the world of Pokemon the most yet by bringing out the most changes yet seen in a mainline Pokemon game. Pokemon Firered and Leafgreen versions were also remade for the GBA, giving players who didn't get a chance in the late 90s to replay the first ever Pokemon games with updated visuals and mechanics. And because it was released alongside Gen 3, and generally considered a Gen 3 title, this has all the Pokemon from not only Gen 1, Gen 2, but also Gen 3 as well, cramming an already amazing game with even more content. As far as I'm aware, there are little to no technological advancements within these remakes, although the new content is added alongside for extra playtime. Gen 3 was a major step up from Gen 1 and Gen 2, mainly thanks to the new hardware, but will Gen 4 show the same promise as Gen 3 did? Generation 4 was debatably the best generation. Among a lot of veteran Pokemon fans, they will usually say that Gen 4 is their favourite. Personally, I don't really see why. I thoroughly enjoyed Pokemon Diamond, but I wouldn't quite go as far to say it was my favourite. It was, however, the first Pokemon game to reach the DS, which opened up a lot more avenues for gameplay with the addition of a second screen. The better hardware of the Nintendo DS allowed much more vibrant environments to be created with 3D models instead of just sprites, allowing much more depth to be added to the in-game world, further immersing the player. Just as you guessed, new generation means new region. This time we travel to the Sinnoh Region, which you guessed again is based on another Japanese location, this time set in the Japanese island of Hokkaido and the southern part of the Russian island Sakhalin, as well as Kunashir, which is claimed by Japan but administered by Russia. Along with the new region also means new Pokemon, 107 of them to be exact, making the general total 493 Pokemon. At this point, while they are still adding new Pokemon, they feel a lot like reskins of older Pokemon. The game has a hint of deja vu throughout the whole thing, a little bit like Gen 3. It all just started to feel similar. They did, however, add more online capable things to do in the game, allowing you to play more freely with friends. And considering the new hardware was in full effect, all they really had to do was implement it. The new Villainous Team of the game is Team Galactic. Their goal relies on the legendary Pokemon of the game, Palkia for Pearl and Dialga for Diamond. The Team Galactic leader needs both Pokemon and their power to rip a hole in time and space and create another universe. So a bit like the previous generations, you go on an adventure and level up your Pokemon and then catch the big guy and done. That's assuming you can get past Cinccio's Garchomp. There were different ways of battling and trading Pokemon now through wireless communications than via link cable. This meant that for the future generations you'll be able to trade with people all over the world from the comfort of your own home. Because of everything at this point becoming wirelessly connected to the internet, they made a lot more online oriented modes and challenges. This isn't exactly a bad thing if you have friends to play with. And I don't. But that's not the point. Gen 4 opened a lot of opportunities for the series to grow and expand, and it did just that. Alongside Pokemon Diamond and Pearl were the remakes to Silver and Gold, aptly named Soul Silver and Hard Gold. These games technologically advanced the series further with the inclusion of the Pokewalker. For the uninitiated, the Pokewalker was basically a precursor to Pokemon Go. It allowed you to transfer Pokemon directly from your game to the Pokewalker and allowed you to catch and find items when outside. Meeting other people who also had one allowed you to trade gifts and do other interactions with each other. The Pokewalker was an ambitious attempt at trying to bring the community even closer and reward people directly in their own games. It worked well for the most part, henceforth making Gen 4 one of the best generations of Pokemon there was. Then the series changed forever. Depending on who you ask, you're going to get one of two answers, most of the time. Those two answers are that Generation 5 is the best generation there ever was, and the second being that it is one of the worst, if not the worst. I personally side with the former argument. Black and White broke a lot of traditions when it came to the game itself. A lot of things seemed different. A wind of change was on the horizon, and with it, brought Generation 5. Generation 5 tries to play it a little differently. You can tell as soon as you press the start button that the game is going to be different. There just seems to be something different right from the get-go. Something stand out, whether it be the new environments with even more colour, or whether it be that this game had the first ever female professor that guided you at certain points throughout the game. A lot of new mechanics were added. While I am biased in this situation as Generation 5 was my favourite, it had its issues, mainly with the Pokemon itself I believe. While this generation boasts the biggest addition of Pokemon to the series since Generation 1, adding 156 brand new Pokemon into the mix, making the total 649, The only problem with this is that a lot of them felt like direct copy-pastes of previous generation Pokemon. You couldn't catch any Pokemon from previous generations until you obtained the National Pokédex at the end of the story, but most of them felt like earlier versions anyway, and if not, then they were either odd-looking or just straight-up trash. A lot of the cooler looking Pokemon could be obtained later in the game, making most of the game feel very samey or very boring on the Pokemon front. From this argument, I can see why some people would say that the earlier generations were better. Generation 5 was probably the first generation of Pokemon games that started to focus more on the story aspect itself. While obviously the gameplay element was still the core focus, the story had a more front-seat approach in these games. I can't really speak for Black and White 2, as I never had the chance to play them unfortunately, but from the standpoint of Black and White, there was more of a narrative-based focus. Generation 5 starts off in the Unova region, which this time, instead of being based on Japan, was based on some areas of the US, mainly New York, as shown by Castelia City. Even entering Castelia City, you are shown some elaborate camera angles showing off the city skyscrapers and how they really push the technical boundaries of the DS. The main villainous team of this game were Team Plasma. Their goal was simple: the liberation of Pokemon. Their goal in their eyes was purely selfless. Unlike the other teams from the previous generations, the corporation was run by N. You encounter N as some weird NPC in the second major city and see him as nothing more as a reoccurring trainer, until he drops a twist later in the game telling you that he is indeed the leader of Team Plasma. Personally, this blew my 11-year-old mind and got me even more hooked on the game itself. A lot of people say that the story is the downfall of Generation 5, but I disagree, stating that N was manipulated by Team Plasma to help liberate Pokemon as he was brought up by them. Getsis saw him as easily moldable into someone who believed in their cause. He didn't choose to believe, he was forced to, via manipulation. A seemingly dark topic for the game, considering its target audience. You start the game with the simple ideology that you want to become champion. A bit like the previous installments, but the further you go, the further away that goal seems. Team Plasma gets stronger by the minute, and it's a race against time to actually save the world. While these themes were loosely followed in the previous generations, they really upped the ante in this as you started to realise that this was bigger than you, bigger than everything. You had to stop Team Plasma once and for all, and your in-game friends aren't exempt from this either. They both undergo lots of character development, with Sharon, who wanted to be a powerful champion, finally trying to figure out what he wanted to do with that power, and Bianca learning that strength isn't everything, and that she was just happy that Pokemon were by her side. The game changes a lot throughout the entire story, and every step you take you know that the past generations are just that, the past. Generation 5, as mentioned previously, really pushed the technological boundaries of the Nintendo DS, really utilising the fact that 3D models were possible, making elaborate camera angles to really show off the beautiful environments. A lot of stuff had changed, the game felt modern. It felt satisfying to play, especially with the new additions of Pokemon sprites being able to move slightly and battle, breathed new life into the series itself. It added more depth to the universe at hand and gave the game more life. I, for one, was well immersed throughout this game. While the previous games did a good job at making you feel part of the world and not the world itself, this game does it perfectly, really hammering home that the game is more story and character based, as you, the player, is just an ordinary person hoping to go on an adventure. The series had changed forever, and it wasn't long before the next generation was here. Generation 6 started in 2013 with the release of Pokemon X and Y. These were the first games to be brought out on the 3DS, giving people high expectations considering the major upgrade in hardware. I personally really enjoyed Pokemon Y, but I could sense from here that the series was starting to fall down. The games followed Generation 5 with another region that wasn't based on Japan. The Kalos Region was this time based on France, and shown by the main city within the game. An Eiffel Tower-shaped landmark is right in the middle of Lumiose City, really showing players that the tides had changed and no more locations based off Japan. For now, anyway. With the arrival of the 3DS, this allowed Game Freak to really open the series as a whole and add some more mechanics to the games themselves, because of the newer hardware. This meant that the games could look better with a bit more freedom on the environment front. Everything still looked very polygonal, and it was such a large game, but the addition of the circle pad allowed more free movement, with instead of 4 axes to move on, it allowed 8 axes to move on, making the game feel much bigger with more freedom and even more detail. The game itself had you travelling with several friends along the way who all had different personality traits, and considering they actually looked like people now and not beans, they felt a bit more like people, growing attached to them more easily overall. The game's villains really aren't that remarkable. You could tell that this game was meant for the younger audience this time around as well. The EXP share is way too easy to obtain, making the game either incredibly easy with it or incredibly hard without it. While the EXP share was present in other games, it was a lot later that it was obtained, meaning you had to level up a full party in order to progress and prosper against other trainers and wild Pokemon. But in this game, you could just power level a single Pokemon and the rest would follow suit. Therefore, this made the game so unbelievably easy that you couldn't even experience the good soundtrack. The gym leaders had an amazing theme, but the only disappointing thing is that the battle was usually over before it got good. You could tell from this point that the EXP shares was completely broken. Unfortunately, they didn't rectify this in later games. The Villainous Team this time around were Team Flare. Because I played Pokemon Ruby and Omega Ruby, this team felt a lot like Team Magma. The same red outfits were present on each of the grunts, making it feel like a cheap nostalgia-based team to appeal to the main Generation 3 fans. This may be apparent later. Lysandra was the main villain of Team Flare, sporting a major light red head of hair and beard. He is not known to be the villain right away, as he seems to be friendly with the player, as well as those who surround him. Only once things get dire for Team Flare does he eventually reveal himself to be the leader. This is where I say that the game may have more so appealed to younger audiences, as his hair is the exact same colour that of the grunts, as well as their uniform. It is blatantly obvious to the older fans that he isn't who he says he is, given his appearance and how he is portrayed within the game. The goal of the team was to seek a world benefiting only those who were devoted to their cause, and disregarding everyone else. The way they were planning on doing this was by using the legendary Pokemon, Yveltal for Y and Xerneas for X, and the player is tasked to stop them. Gen 6 seems to go back to the old way of portraying villains as people with a selfish desire for power and fame, unlike that of Generation 5. One of the major mechanics added within Gen 6 were the ability of Mega Evolutions, allowing already existing Pokemon to evolve in battle, adding more detail to the character models than prior games. This allowed moves to become even more effective, allowing a major alteration in how battles were carried out later within the game, adding more strategy in order to secure a victory. Alongside Pokemon X and Y, Pokemon Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire were the Gen 6 remakes of Gen 3, being an entire 2 consoles ahead of when the first Gen 3 games were released. They were able to really update the games, breathing new life into the classics yet again. The whole of Generation 6 seems like it wanted to be new and unique, while also not straying too far by being oriented towards the now older, more classic players. The games also had a mechanic of Mega Evolution, allowing you to play the classic games with this newfounded game-changing mechanic. Gen 6 seems like a good start for the 3DS saga of games, although this is where they started to fall off. Generation 7 was the last generation to be present on the 3DS and 2DS. A bit like Gen 5 from Gen 4, Gen 7 from Gen 6 allowed for better looking environments, mainly thanks to the 2DS having better hardware. The Generation 7 games were called Pokemon Sun and Moon, which would then go on to be Pokemon Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, which we will touch upon shortly. I never played the original Sun and Moon, as I was told Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon had even more content, so I didn't really see a point, but as far as I know, the games were mostly the same, not having many changes at all. I'm going to be comparing this generation of games to Generation 5, and that is because this generation also broke a lot of traditions for the game, adding and removing certain mechanics to add for more smoothness of gameplay for the younger audiences. With new generations comes yet another region. This region being the Alola region, based off the islands of Hawaii, with a brand new villainous team of Team Skull. Team Skull seemed a lot less like an actual organisation, and just a gang with a lot of members, but again, we will touch upon them shortly. While I personally still enjoyed Pokemon Sun, I can see why people say it is bad and one of the worst ones. As previously mentioned, they added and removed a lot of mechanics while retaining some from Gen 6. One of the major ones I disliked was the addition of the EXP share. It functioned exactly as it did back in Gen 6, with it being an option you enable, not an item held by a specific Pokemon. This made the game, again, incredibly easy with it, or incredibly hard without it. This made my experience a lot more conflicting, as I initially tried without it, but grinding for XP on each individual Pokemon was just a crawl. So I eventually decided to play with it on in the end, and found myself at least 10 levels over every stage in the game I was currently in, making the game completely effortless. This is also what destroyed my experience with Gen 6. Another addition to the game itself was in battles. Moves now said whether they were super effective or not very effective, just under each one, making the game even easier than it was before and moving a lot of challenge from the game. Whereas before you would have to remember certain types and certain moves were effective against certain Pokemon, whereas now it just tells you. This combined with the EXP share just completely destroyed the experience and made you clearly tell that it was meant for younger audiences. You can really tell at this point that the games are starting to cater towards the younger audience, and not the audience retained from almost 20 years prior. This isn't exactly a bad thing, but I feel like for extra challenge there should have been extra measures to cater for both, possibly an option to turn the new move indicators off, and perhaps other balancing measures for people who wanted to play without the EXP share, maybe awarding extra XP whenever a battle is won without it. This would have made the game a lot better overall, as the game would have still have retained some challenge and therefore retained my attention. I feel like they tried to work on the story more in this one, a bit like Gen 5. Some people might argue that there are two villainous teams in this game instead of the initial one, this being both Team Skull and the Ether Foundation. The Ether Foundation is friendly for the most part, apart from a single stage in the game where you infiltrate the island. So I personally dispute the claims of there being two villainous teams. Again, I want you to keep in mind that I played Ultra Sun, so if there are any differences in the story described here, and you played the Vanilla Sun, then it may just be that the game changed it. The story is really based around getting to different islands within the game and completing your journey. You meet tons of people along the way, including one of the main ones being Lily. She plays a bigger part in the story than she lets on, but as shown in the beginning cutscene, she's escaping with a Pokemon in a duffel bag, which follows her and us throughout the game. This small Pokemon she calls Nebby turns out to be the legendary Pokemon of whichever version you played. For me, it was Solgaleo, and for those of you that played Moon and Ultra Moon, it would have been Lunala. Solgaleo obviously referencing the sun, and Lunala obviously referencing the moon. Team Skull don't really seem to have an agenda of taking over the islands of Alola or liberating Pokemon. Their goal is simply to make enough money to survive. They disrupt your island challenge multiple times, and you can find them harassing multiple other people for money or their Pokemon. The leader is Guzma, and instead of having some hidden base or towering castle, they hold up in an abandoned town, which I'm assuming was forcefully evacuated by them considering the state of disrepair everything is in. While I don't agree with their methods, you can relate to these people, as they are just trying to find a way to survive. You battle the leader Guzma multiple times throughout the game, and each time you do, you scrape away a layer to his character, with you eventually helping him later on in the game. While the story is not remarkable by any means, it takes the focus and decides to focus on alien Pokemon instead of the villainous teams themselves. Generation 7 added a lot of new things into the game, including the things mentioned earlier, but they did a lot of changes overall. They decided to scrap HMs in this game, leaving the job to different Pokemon you could ride on, performing certain tasks for you. One would sniff out hidden items, while another would smash boulders. It was a wide array of different Pokemon for different needs, and I thought it was a cool addition. They also decided to rework the way the Elite Four worked. Whereas you would have to face them all near the end before the champion, they decided to make it so you fought one before you went to another island. Meaning you would battle one every sort of 25% of the game, which refreshed the formula slightly. They also added a similar mechanic to that of the Mega Revolutions from Gen 6, except this time it was more of a move power-up rather than a Pokemon power-up through Z Crystals. You acquired these Z Crystals at different stages of the game. You were able to use a special move of your specific type for one time in the battle only, making it a bit more balanced than Gen 6, but also still retaining the idea of it. This game also boasted the smallest amount of Pokemon in the game of 81, bringing the total to 802. They also added new regional forms to a lot of existing Pokemon, making a lot of the older Pokemon feel newer and making them seem more original than the previous 2 to 3 generations. Pokemon Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon added some new items to the story, including some new Pokemon which made the overall total 807. The story was changed, though not much as far as I believe, and possibly the biggest change of all, the addition of Ultra Space, giving new locations and Pokemon, especially legendaries from previous generations being present, adding more of a reason to buy the updated versions. Alongside Pokemon Sun and Moon, Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Let's Go Eevee were introduced as the first mainline Pokemon games for the Nintendo Switch. I unfortunately won't be able to give much of an insight onto these as I have yet to get a Switch, meaning I haven't played them yet. All I know for the most part is that they were remakes of Gen 1, meaning that Gen 1 made history for the series as it is, as of yet, the first generation to have 2 remakes. Also, they aren't completely remakes. They are in the same region as Gen 1 and retain a lot of things from Gen 1. I wouldn't say it's too far-fetched to compare it to Pokemon Black and White 2, as the game is set in the same area with the same stuff, but there are some subtle changes from that of the original. I know I never played them, but I'm going to do my best to give you my insights on Generation 8 and how it differs from the previous titles. As mentioned before, I do not have a Nintendo Switch. This means I had to resort to the wiki for most of my findings on this generation, so if any details are hazy, then please bear with me, as I have yet to play them. Generation 8 was the first of the brand new titles for the Pokemon Switch, being released last year in 2019, under the names of Pokemon Sword and Pokemon Shield. This meant again that because of the new hardware developments, the game would surely play and feel better overall. This game sets you in the Galar region, which is instantly the best of them all because it's set in none other than the Blighty. That's right, this game's region is based off multiple areas of the UK, having most of the gyms take place in stadiums akin to that of football, or soccer if you're a heretic. The main villains in this game, if you can even call them villains, are Team Yell, who are inspired by football hooligans? Really? That's the best you could come up with, Nintendo? Right then, let's get on with it. Team Yell are a little like Team Skull, in a sense, as they don't really seem to be evil, but their main goal is to prevent the other players from progressing their league challenge so their waifu Marnie can be the champion of Galar. Pretty simple, but original to say the least. The game boasts an addition of 87 new Pokemon, making it one of the more smaller additions to the series, making the total 896. But considering Gen 7 added loads of new region forms, I'm assuming Gen 8 did something similar. As it states from the wiki, there is nothing saying that any of the major mechanics have been removed, such as the move's effectiveness in the battle menu. A little like Gen 7 and 6, they have added slightly different mechanics, akin to the Z crystals and the Mega Evolutions. This time around it is known as Dynomax, which increases the size of a Pokemon and allows them to use max moves for 3 turns. Gigantamax expands on this mechanic by also changing a Pokemon's form and turning moves of a certain type into G-Max moves. This generation of games is the first to include major DLC known as the Sword and Shield Expansion Pass, making it yet another generic AAA title. There are many more changes listed in the wiki, but we would be here all day if I were to mention them. The same with all the previous generations, so if you really want to get a good understanding of the changes between all generations, then please feel free to read. In conclusion, I believe the game started to fall off around Gen 5, making the games too easy and taking away a lot of the challenge that made Pokemon into Pokemon. The game started to feel like it was adding too much and straying away from the simplicity of the original formula. Sure, the game needed changes, but I feel like there was way too many in the end. The problem is that even with the changes presented to us, the game either felt like it was too different or too similar, and there was little to no middle ground. I feel like because of this reason the game started to become shadows of their former selves, favouring new gameplay mechanics that just remove challenge and simplicity in exchange for things to advertise and put on the back of the box. It just doesn't feel like Pokemon anymore, and I think that's a real shame considering the absolute monolith this series is and how much it has influenced the entire industry itself. But hey, that's all I really have to say on the matter. If you guys disagree with anything I have to say, then please let me know, and please show me your own opinions as well on which was your favourite and why. Anyway, that's going to be it for me. I hope you guys went on to enjoy this video. If you did, then please do be sure to leave a like, comment, and subscribe. It helps more than you could ever know. And I will see you all in the next one.